time for a couple of questions. Tyler?
So you mentioned, very clearly that, the Biden administration is taking the border seriously, not what you mentioned, the fentanyl issue, the human trafficking. Is there momentum among Democrats that you talk to in the Senate on doing something, even if it's not as far as you guys would like to go, with regard to the border enforcement?
Someone would have to have their head in the sand not to realize that we have to do something. When you talk to our Border Patrol and our local law enforcement, and they say the cartels have better technology than we do, and they're surveilling us. They know where we are and where we're not. They're flooding the border with drugs. They're flooding the border with criminal, illegal aliens. They are flooding, they're trafficking humans in large numbers. They're abusing these individuals. So there has got to be attention on the border. My hope is that they will begin to publicly talk about the need to do something at the border. There has been an unwillingness on the part of most of them to talk publicly about what needs to be done. We think this is a great starting spot. If somebody is trafficking drugs in human beings and they are apprehended and they're receiving federal benefits, cut them off right then. If later they're found to be innocent, you can go back and revisit that. But if they are trafficking drugs and people, the benefits, government benefits, welfare, housing, etc., needs to stop. Eric, you had your hand up.
Senator, would you categorize this latest trip on what you saw as just another example that DHS Secretary Mayorkas should actually step down?
I know the House is going to move forward with investigating him and the policies that they have pushed forward. I just, every day, I thank God that we have Border Patrol that continue to show up to work, even though their hands are tied. And as Katie was talking about, Senator Britt was talking about, they say, we're in the asylum business because that's what we're being forced to do right now. We are not able to protect and defend the border, which is what we take our oath to do. And they want to get back out and defend that border. It requires some kind of barrier. It requires better technology. It requires keeping Title 42 and remain in Mexico and ending catch and release. And they are ready to get back to doing their job. Go ahead.
Kind of walk us through. This is a very unique problem. Can you walk us through how you discovered that it existed and why do you think this is?
If you go to the border and you talk to local law enforcement and to federal law enforcement at the border, they will tell you about this and will talk about this. Yes, it is a unique problem, but there should be agreement on both sides of the aisle that people who are breaking the law and who are drug trafficking and human trafficking ought not to be receiving federal government benefits. Yes.
I just wanted to clarify. So, are they saying this exacerbates the problem at the border by?
It enables. It enables. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Attorney General, I want to go back to what we discussed earlier with the 2 tiers of justice. And the answers you've given us, you're very subjective in how you approach decisions. You don't seem to be rules-based in how you make these decisions. As a matter of fact, you come across as being very political in the decisions that you make. And politicizing your work is something that really offends most Tennesseans. But I want to ask you about this 2 tiers of justice, particularly in the way you've responded to congressional oversight investigations. The House Judiciary Committee recently requested that you turn over documents relating to the special counsel investigation of President Biden's mishandling of classified documents. But your DOJ so far has stonewalled the House request. claiming you can't turn over documents on an open matter. Now, let's compare that with your decision, obviously very subjective, to fully cooperate with document request from the House January 6th committee. Your FBI had no problem at all turning over documents and information to that committee, even though they related to an open investigation. Do you see this comparison here? Do you appreciate this? This is a prime example of two tiers of justice, your two-tier system, who you're going to cooperate with and who you are not. So why have you cooperated with the document requests that were made from Democratic-led committees, but you have refused, Chairman Jordan, and you have refused the House Judiciary Committee when they are requesting documents that pertain to President Biden's mishandling of classified documents?
So we greatly respect the oversight responsibilities of the committees of the Congress, and at the same time, we have to protect our ongoing investigations. I do not believe we turned over information to the January 6th committee about
Mr. Attorney
ongoing
General, your
investigation.
response is you give one set of responses for Republicans, another for Democrats. You have one tier of justice for people that are conservatives and another for those that are on the left. You told me earlier that you didn't know who Jane's Revenge is. They are all over Twitter. I'm going to do you a favor. I am going to send you a letter with a whole lot of Twitter and different feeds to help you in that investigation for the Hope Clinic.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Attorney General. Thank you for your time today. Listening to the questions and the answers and your responses, what is coming clear to me as I listen to this is basically in your DOJ, the Biden DOJ, there are two tiers of justice. There are one for people with conservative values, for parents, for people of faith, and then there is another tier of justice that applies to the Washington liberal elites, political elites. And what I want to do is dig down a little bit on how you and the department have applied this discretionary form of justice. It's something that concerns Tennesseans, and when I'm across the state, we have 95 counties. I visit each of them every year. And Mr. Attorney General, that comes up quite a bit. Much of it has come up in relation to the Dobbs decision. And the attacks and the violence there has increased from groups on the far left. It has not increased from pro-life groups. And since the Dobbs leak, there have been 70 pro-life pregnancy centers that were targeted. Only 2 of these activists have been indicted. There are 25 individuals that have been indicted under the FACE Act in just 5 months. So you see the disparity there. I appreciate you said that most of these attacks are carried out at night and that the protests take place during the day. So you say it's easier to identify and go after people that are carrying out a peaceful protest during the day rather than a firebombing at night. Is that correct?
Yeah, if I could just say, I wish you would assure your constituents in all the counties that the Justice Department does not treat people in the way that is described.
Well, then
we treat like cases alike. We do not have one view.
Okay, then let's talk about a specific case in Tennessee, the Hope Clinic. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with it
Okay, the Hope
specifically.
Clinic for Women is a pregnancy resource center in Nashville. And currently, you have gone out of your way to prosecute 11 individuals in Tennessee under the FACE Act. And are you aware that this clinic was the subject of an attempted firebombing with a Molotov cocktail?
So we are very concerned about these kind of fire bombings, and I agree with you, they're happening around
Okay.
the United States. The FBI has put its resources into this. We are investigating it in every way. We've offered rewards for anyone who
Then
has
let's
information.
talk about how these groups get classified. When we talked about the way parents of children were treated, and because they were concerned over what was being taught in school, Senator Kennedy just went through that with you. You applied domestic terrorism as a term in couching that activity. Now, under federal law, which you have cited, this is how you term domestic terrorism, and I'm quoting, activities that involve acts dangerous to human life that are a violation of the criminal laws of the United States or of any state. So under that definition, would you agree that firebombing a crisis pregnancy center constitutes an act of domestic terrorism?
I would say yes, but I want to again disagree with your earlier characterizations. There was no memorandum about parents complaining to their school boards, and there was.
Talking about firebombing pregnancy
I understand,
centers now.
and there was no reference in that memo to
would
using
agree
domestic
that
terrorism.
Firebombing
Where it said,
a
yes, firebombing where
domestic terrorism.
it's at least domestic violent
Okay,
extremism.
so then let's talk about the far-left group Jane's Revenge, because they claimed responsibility for that. They went so far as to spray paint their name on the wall. So do you intend to prosecute them?
We intend, if we find them, to do that. There is a
Oh, so you can't find them?
if you have information about those groups, we
Well,
would be happy to.
that is your job.
That's right, and we
go
are
ahead.
putting heavy resources into this. We have found a group
Say they're a
that's,
domestic terrorist organization.
I would say it depends on,
Revenge.
it depends on
who
the
took-
people.
who took credit for this, spray painted their name on the wall.
We have-
Let me
we have-
ask you a couple of questions before my time runs out. We've talked a little bit today about the targeting at the justices' homes. Have you released any type of memorandum that explicitly condemns the acts of intimidation outside of the Supreme Court justices' homes?
I have directly instructed the Marshal Service to send over 70 United States Marshals to prevent acts of violence and threats of violence outside those.
Memo.
I don't need to do a memo because I spoke directly to the marshals about this topic.
All right. Have you watched any of the footage of the protesters outside the justices' homes?
Unless I caught it on the news, I haven't specifically watched it.
Are you investigating any of those individuals? You said, you know, you investigate protesters because they do their activity in the light of day. And most of the firebombings and things take place at night, but I would think the FBI knows how to investigate crimes.
As
that
I
take place
explained,
at night.
our principal responsibility here is to protect the lives of the justices. We've put United
But you
States.
haven't watched any of that footage.
The United States Marshals are on scene, watching what happens on scene.
Any of those individuals that were protesting at the justices' homes were there for any reason other than to try to intimidate the justices?
The Marshal's job is to protect the lives of the justices, and they will arrest people who they think are threatening the lives of the justices. That's their job.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. I have to say, people in Tennessee talk a lot about their frustration. They want to trust the DOJ. They want to be able to trust their government. They are very concerned about what appears to be, by actions, 2 tiers of justice. And this is something that they do not see as equal treatment under the law. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. Senator Welch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Attorney General. I appreciate the work you've been doing on election infrastructure and security. We have our town meeting in Vermont next week. We're pretty proud of that. You raise your hand and
See, and we'll have the staff, the finance staff, share what we have on Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 with my colleagues. Senator Blackburn is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, thank you for being with us today. I want to return to the SVB issue and ask you, I haven't heard you say today, when were you first notified that there were problems with SVB, and when did you alert members of Congress? What was that time lag?
I believe that I first found out about the troubles at Silicon Valley Bank. I guess it was last Thursday.
Last Thursday. And then your notification of Congress came when?
The bank was put
Why
in.
don't you just put that in writing for me so I don't waste my time? I know Senator Langford asked you about the Deposit Insurance Fund and how that would affect our local banks. And there's a lot of concern over this. And I know you were uncertain about that. If you would run the numbers on that and let us know a ballpark of what you think this would cost if you end up insuring everybody's deposit. And then I have to ask you, being from Tennessee, you know, we have a long and storied history of opposing nationalizing the banking system. Do you see this as a step to nationalize the banking system?
Absolutely not. I see
Okay.
this as a step toward stemming contagion that could come
Okay.
from the failure of these banks that would place community banks
Okay.
across the country at
Thank
great
you.
risk of runs as
All
well
right.
that we want to.
Thank you, ma'am. Let me move to the Inflation Reduction Act and that implementation. I hear a lot about this from local mayors and our state agencies. There is a lot of money that can be doled out. Treasury and other agencies are going to be required to issue guidance. That hasn't come, and so there's a lot of confusion there. And I was looking at the structure, and I want to make certain that I'm viewing this right. You have the Deputy Secretary, the Office of IRA Implementation within Treasury, the Office of IRA Implementation in the IRS, and Danny Werfel, who is the new, recently confirmed IRS Commissioner. So with all of these bodies involved, who is actually in charge? Who's the final decision maker on the guidance and the timeline for releasing that guidance?
Well, our Office of Tax Policy drafts regulations.
Okay, so they're
and we
doing
go
it?
through a regular
Then do you
rulemaking.
sign off on it? Are you the final
I do.
say?
I
So
do
you
sign
are the
off
one
on it.
that's
We
the final
confer
say.
with many,
Okay.
many people in the
Then-
process of drafting that, and it will go through full comment and review
All
before
right.
final.
Let me ask you something else, because the buck stops with you. You have really praised the IRA. I want to ask you one more thing about that, because your statements contradict themselves somewhat. You talk about the IRA as a way to really bring prosperity, to lower inflation, to lower the debt. So do you really believe that we can spend our way to lower inflation, to debt reduction, and to economic prosperity with
Well,
the
I
amount of debt?
I believe that this law promotes clean energy and R&D and investment in the United States.
That's not my question.
that
Do
will-
you believe we can spend our way to lower inflation? And I'm going to move on, obviously.
I've never said
we
any
don't there.
such.
Oh, well, okay.
I've never said that I think that
All
that's
right.
a
Thank
way
you,
to
ma'am.
lower inflation.
You have mentioned the IRS being able to answer more phone calls and respond more quickly because of the IRA funding. And I was looking at the IRS data, and it shows that the IRS actually answered 2.6 million fewer calls this March during the tax filing season. So, and I know Senator Thune asked you about this, if we could get some clarity from you and from your testimony about this, and what is the rate, how often are these calls answered and missed, what percentage of people at the IRS are still working remotely, and what is your timeline for bringing them all back?
What I can tell you is that the response rate to customer calls has been between 80 and 90% every week during this tax filing season, and that's a massive improvement. The IRS hired 5,000 new people to put into customer service, and that relied on funds from the IRA.
My time has expired, but the 8 Corners data call that the IRS gave in early March, the IRS says they've actually answered 2.6 million fewer calls this tax filing season.
There may have been fewer calls, but the rate of response was very much higher.
Thank you.
Hugely
Thank you,
higher.
Madam Secretary.
We do need to move on. Senator Menendez.
The Federal Reserve's emergency lending.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. And I am so grateful we have the Alzheimer's volunteers here. We have a great group in Tennessee. And there's some back there. Love seeing them. But you know, Mr. Secretary, the budget that you brought to us, it is full of things that get in the way of research. It would prevent new drugs and therapies from coming to market. It would weaken those IP protections. And it would expand big government, and it's something that does cost us some concern. I want to return to the issue of telework. I know that Senator Cassidy discussed this with you. Adding to the list of how many HHS employees are working telework, I would like for you to identify the essential and non-essential components of that list of those that are teleworking. And also looking at you and your team personally, when you look at telework, how many days have you spent in California during COVID-19?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. With regard to my status, I know that requests have been made for my schedule, and we will try to provide as much information
Yes,
as we can.
I think it would be great if we were able to get the schedule for you, your security detail, and the records expense reports so that we could see how much. The reason this is important is because you are overseeing an agency that is the equivalent of 1/10 of our nation's GDP. And I think that it is vital that you be on site in overseeing that department. So can you even ballpark how long you were in California and how often you were absent?
I don't get to California very often. When I do, it's usually because I'm doing work and I would travel.
During the pandemic, because I think it's important that during the pandemic that you were there.
Not
and
often.
I want to read this back to you. 2019, talking about the border crisis, you said of President Trump, and I quote, "And to say that it's an emergency, and then within 24 hours, having said it, go off to Florida to your Mar-a-Lago resort when you think there is a national emergency. I think all the evidence, including what Donald Trump says and does, proves this is no national emergency," end quote. So by your own standard, you would equate COVID to not being a national emergency if you're spending those hours in California and being absent from the headquarters. It's time to get people back to work. Faith-based organizations. We have 8,000 faith-based organizations across the country that are irreplaceable members of the nation's child welfare system. Senator Ossoff and I are going to do some bipartisan work at Judiciary Committee on these issues. Tennessee relies heavily on faith-based agencies for services like foster care, adoption, different child and family services, and the recruitment of those adoptive families. Now, under your leadership, one of the first actions that HHS took was to rescind waivers issued by the previous administration, which allowed faith-based groups to place children with families in accordance with their sincerely held religious beliefs. The president's budget now proposes to combat sexual orientation and gender identity discrimination by penalizing foster care and adoption providers for operating in accordance with their tenets of faith. So, with nearly 400,000 children in the foster care system, would you not agree that placing those kids in loving homes is a greater priority than advancing an agenda?
Senator, thank you for the question. There is no doubt that being able to place any child who's in foster care in a loving home should be our top priority. And we want to make sure that that's always possible. We want to make sure laws are not violated that would prevent that child from going to a loving home.
Let's do this. Let's have you submit how many potential foster and adoptive homes would be forced out of the system if the president's budget were put into effect on that issue. I want to go back. I know Senator Menendez talked to you about the Office of Refugee Resettlement, and this department is responsible for the care and placement of unaccompanied children who come across the U.S. border, correct? And are you aware of the recent New York Times article that really reported on the large numbers of unaccompanied children who are being placed with exploitative sponsors and working long hours in dangerous conditions?
I'm aware of the fact that a number of children have been reported to be working in ways that are violating our law, but I'm not aware of the situation you mentioned about being placed in exploitative circumstances. So if you could clarify that a bit more.
I will be happy. Mr. Chairman, I'd love to submit that article for the record.
Without objection.
That is wonderful. Thank you for that. Now, the agency, the Times reported that under the Biden presidency, the agency cannot find 85,000 children, and that the agency lost contact with a third of the migrant children that are coming into the country. So I'd like to know what you're doing to find the children and what you're doing to make certain that these children are not being trafficked.
Senator, first, those statistics that you've mentioned, as I said previously in regards to another question by one of your colleagues, those are unfamiliar to me. I have no idea where those statistics come from, if they're based in reality or not. And we do everything we can to make sure any child, before we allow them to be released to a sponsor, that sponsor has been vetted.
Okay.
The vast majority of these children end up with a family member, immediate family member, as a placement. So some of those statistics that are being thrown out there that don't seem to be based in fact really would go contrary to what actually we've done.
Okay, my time is over, but let me tell you, we have to get this thing straightened out. At any time you had 10,500 children under your care, the money works out to about $1,400 a day to take care of these children, and you can't find these children. We have to get it straightened out. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ossoff, Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin my questions today, I do want to express my heartbreak at what happened yesterday in Nashville at Covenant School and Covenant Presbyterian Church. And my family and I are grieving along with the rest of the community. And I thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your call yesterday, your kind remarks today. And violence against children is just one of the most heinous crimes. And the families there at Covenant Pres and Covenant School, I just grieve for what they're going through. We have to work to protect children at school, and that means increasing security. And I have had legislation that would allow for training and hiring of veterans and former law enforcement officials to serve as school safety officers and to help protect our schools. It is time for us to pass that and to help keep our children safe. I'd like to turn to the questions that are in front of us today. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your patience today. I want to go to this issue of human smuggling. And under this administration, the human smuggling business has gone from being a $500 million a year business to a $13 billion a year industry. And we heard from Secretary Becerra last week at our Senate Finance Committee. And we've got 85,000 unaccompanied alien children, migrant children, who have been released in the U.S. The HHS has lost track of these unaccompanied children. So my question to you is this: how many of these children are being trafficked? How many of these children are being put into the sex trade? What are you doing to try to find these children? And when you look at what is happening to women and children, do you all understand that it is the policies of this administration, what you're doing on the border, that is causing 85,000 children to be lost, can't find them, and not knowing if they're being trafficked, put in gangs, put in the sex trade? So what are you all doing to find these children, and do you understand that it is the policies that is causing this?
Senator, let me share with you what we are doing to address the scourge of human smuggling and human trafficking. And let me say, with respect to the unaccompanied children, and this will echo what I shared with Senator Ossoff just a moment ago. With respect to unaccompanied children, when we receive them at the border, it is our legal obligation to release them to the care of the Department of Health and Human Services within
That's right, and now they cannot find them.
Within 72
85,000.
hours. And so what we do is we release
Is that
them.
an acceptable number?
Oh, absolutely not.
Right.
Absolutely not.
So
But-
what?
So let me share with you. So we release them. One of the reasons why we are devoting our worksite enforcement resources and energies on unscrupulous employers is precisely for the reason that you identify. We must hold accountable employers who engage in child labor.
I appreciate that. Let's look at it.
With
Yeah.
respect to the border,
Yeah, and
we-
let's look at it this way.
two efforts we have underway. One is we are taking it to the smugglers in an unprecedented
They haven't
effort.
gotten that message.
Oh, yes, they have. We have.
I beg to differ, because the situation, it is now a $13 billion a year business. When you go to that border, as I have done, and when you talk to women that have been trafficked and have gotten themselves out and have been raped repeatedly, there is a sexual assault epidemic going on that border. And it is because of the policies of this administration.
Senator.
And it is so.
Senator, it is because of the heinous exploitation of the smuggling organizations.
And what is
that
incentivizing
do not care,
that?
That do not
That's
care.
right. That's exactly right. And you and I agree on that. They do not care about human life. They see people as a product.
Yes, they are.
And a way to make a buck, because they are billion-dollar businesses. They have, and let me turn to the fentanyl epidemic, because we've all talked about this. And I'm hearing from some of my sheriffs now that from a border town sheriff, that fentanyl, a pill now is down to about 5 cents, because they've teamed up with the Chinese scientists. They're making these in the labs with the cartels. And I think that you've talked a little bit about the fentanyl today, but you really don't have an estimate of how much is truly coming over that border. And we know that you're saying that they are catching about 95% of that. But what I have heard is what you're giving us is the CBP numbers. You're not giving us the numbers that are coming from air and marine operations. You're not including the Coast Guard. You're not including the DEA. And you're not including what is found by state and local law enforcement. So why won't you look at the holistic number of what everybody is finding?
Oh, Senator, the scourge of fentanyl is something that we do not in any way underestimate. Let me, if I may, share with you. As I mentioned earlier, I served as a federal prosecutor for 12 years.
Yes.
I prosecuted
No,
cocaine.
you're not answering my
Oh, no, if
question,
I
and I've
can.
only got 3 minutes left.
If I can.
Why are you not, why do you not include what everybody is finding? State and local law
we do.
enforcement, the
But the-
DEA, the Marine?
We do. Senator, the question that was posed to me was with respect to the southern border and how fentanyl is trafficked into the United States.
Okay, I
And
need
the
to
vast
move
majority
on,
of
but
it-
if you will.
Vast majority of it is brought in through the ports of entry.
No, sir, I beg to differ with that. When you talk to Border Patrol and you talk to local sheriffs, I would like to get from you in writing a total number of what you are finding, not only from CBP, but also from the air and marine operations, the Coast Guard, the DEA, and state and local law enforcement. Let me move on about the gotaways, because we've had over 1.2 million migrants that have evaded authorities and have come into the country illegally. And it is of concern to me when I hear you all try to make illegal legal. There's an app for this, and allowing people to continue to come in illegally. Now, ICE arrested 220 illegal immigrants in 9 days that had criminal convictions of rape and murder. Now, it doesn't take rocket science to go figure out that in those 1.2 million that are unknown gotaways or known gotaways, that number that have disappeared in our country, that you've got murderers and criminals and rapists that are in that number, the gotaways. So how many of those have made it into Tennessee? How many are in our communities? How many are in our streets? Are you all tracking these, or have you lost them like the 85,000 children?
Senator, I would say two things. Number one, we are intensely focused on securing the border, as I have testified earlier. Number
Okay,
one.
then-
And number two, I think it's very important not to paint with a broad brush individuals who come to the United States.
Well, I
And
think it's
so-
important to note what Border Patrol is telling us. If you're intent on securing the border, then you spend $50 million a year to caretake the items, components from the border wall project that was in the previous administration. The border wall, by the way, the Border Patrol has been asking for a physical barrier for decades. I think about 30 years in total. So instead of wasting that money to do nothing with the construction material, why don't you use those remaining materials and that $50 million and fill in the gaps in this wall so that the Border Patrol has a physical barrier that they need?
Senator, I've approved the vast majority of the projects to close the gaps and complete the gates with respect to the funding that we received.
Mr. Chairman, I have one other question on Chinese nationals that I will submit for a written answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. Senator Tillis.
Good afternoon, Secretary Mayorkas. How's your day going?
Good afternoon, sir.
Ossoff, Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin my questions today, I do want to express my heartbreak at what happened yesterday in Nashville at Covenant School and Covenant Presbyterian Church. And my family and I are grieving along with the rest of the community. And I thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your call yesterday, your kind remarks today. And violence against children is just one of the most heinous crimes. And the families there at Covenant Pres and Covenant School, I just grieve for what they're going through. We have to work to protect children at school, and that means increasing security. And I have had legislation that would allow for training and hiring of veterans and former law enforcement officials to serve as school safety officers and to help protect our schools. It is time for us to pass that and to help keep our children safe. I'd like to turn to the questions that are in front of us today. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your patience today. I want to go to this issue of human smuggling. And under this administration, the human smuggling business has gone from being a $500 million a year business to a $13 billion a year industry. And we heard from Secretary Becerra last week at our Senate Finance Committee. And we've got 85,000 unaccompanied alien children, migrant children, who have been released in the U.S. The HHS has lost track of these unaccompanied children. So my question to you is this: how many of these children are being trafficked? How many of these children are being put into the sex trade? What are you doing to try to find these children? And when you look at what is happening to women and children, do you all understand that it is the policies of this administration, what you're doing on the border, that is causing 85,000 children to be lost, can't find them, and not knowing if they're being trafficked, put in gangs, put in the sex trade? So what are you all doing to find these children, and do you understand that it is the policies that is causing this?
Senator, let me share with you what we are doing to address the scourge of human smuggling and human trafficking. And let me say, with respect to the unaccompanied children, and this will echo what I shared with Senator Ossoff just a moment ago. With respect to unaccompanied children, when we receive them at the border, it is our legal obligation to release them to the care of the Department of Health and Human Services within
That's right, and now they cannot find them.
within 72
85,000.
hours. And so what we do is we release
Is that
them.
an acceptable number?
Oh, absolutely not.
Right.
Absolutely not.
So
But-
what?
So let me share with you. So we release them. One of the reasons why we are devoting our worksite enforcement resources and energies on unscrupulous employers is precisely for the reason that you identify. We must hold accountable employers who engage in
Okay,
child labor.
I appreciate that. Let's look at it.
With
Yeah.
respect to the border,
Yeah, and
we-
let's look at it this way.
two efforts we have underway. One is we are taking it to the smugglers in an unprecedented
They haven't
effort.
gotten that message.
Oh, yes, they have. We have.
I beg to differ, because the situation, it is now a $13 billion a year business. When you go to that border, as I have done, and when you talk to women that have been trafficked and have gotten themselves out and have been raped repeatedly, there is a sexual assault epidemic going on that border. And it is because of the policies of this administration.
Senator.
And it is so.
Senator, it is because of the heinous exploitation of the smuggling organizations.
And what is
that
incentivizing
do not care,
that?
That do not
That's
care.
right. That's exactly right. And you and I agree on that. They do not care about human life. They see people as a product.
Yes, they are.
And a way to make a buck, because they are billion-dollar businesses. They have, and let me turn to the fentanyl epidemic, because we've all talked about this. And I'm hearing from some of my sheriffs now that from a border town sheriff, that fentanyl, a pill now is down to about 5 cents, because they've teamed up with the Chinese scientists. They're making these in the labs with the cartels. And I think that you've talked a little bit about the fentanyl today. but you really don't have an estimate of how much is truly coming over that border. And we know that you're saying that they are catching about 95% of that. But what I have heard is what you're giving us is the CBP numbers. You're not giving us the numbers that are coming from air and marine operations. You're not including the Coast Guard. You're not including the DEA, and you're not including what is found by state and local law enforcement. So why won't you look at the holistic number of what everybody is finding?
Oh, Senator, the scourge of fentanyl is something that we do not in any way underestimate. Let me, if I may, share with you. As I mentioned earlier, I served as a federal prosecutor for 12 years.
Yes.
I prosecuted
No,
cocaine.
you're not answering my
Oh, no, if
question,
I
and I've
can.
only got 3 minutes left.
If I can.
Why are you not, why do you not include what everybody is finding? State and local law
we do.
enforcement, the
But the-
DEA, the Marine?
We do. Senator, the question that was posed to me was with respect to the southern border and how fentanyl is trafficked into the United States.
Okay, I need
and the
to
vast
move
majority
on,
of
but
it,
if you will.
vast majority of it is brought in through the ports of entry.
No, sir, I beg to differ with that. When you talk to Border Patrol and you talk to local sheriffs, I would like to get from you in writing a total number of what you are finding, not only from CBP, but also from the air and marine operations, the Coast Guard, the DEA, and state and local law enforcement. Let me move on about the gotaways, because we've had over 1.2 million migrants that have evaded authorities and have come into the country illegally. And it is of concern to me when I hear you all try to make illegal legal. There's an app for this, and allowing people to continue to come in illegally. Now, ICE arrested 220 illegal immigrants in 9 days that had criminal convictions of rape and murder. Now, it doesn't take rocket science to go figure out that in those 1.2 million that are unknown gotaways or known gotaways, that number that have disappeared in our country, that you've got murderers and criminals and rapists that are in that number, the gotaways. So how many of those have made it into Tennessee? How many are in our communities? How many are in our streets? Are you all tracking these, or have you lost them like the 85,000 children?
Senator, I would say two things. Number one, we are intensely focused on securing the border, as I have testified earlier. Number
Okay,
one. And
then-
number two, I think it's very important not to paint with a broad brush individuals who come to the United States.
Well, I
And
think it's
so-
important to note what Border Patrol is telling us. If you're intent on securing the border, then you spend $50 million a year to caretake the items, components from the border wall project that was in the previous administration. The border wall, by the way, the Border Patrol has been asking for a physical barrier for decades. I think about 30 years in total. So instead of wasting that money to do nothing with the construction material, why don't you use those remaining materials and that $50 million and fill in the gaps in this wall so that the Border Patrol has a physical barrier that they need?
Senator, I've approved the vast majority of the projects to close the gaps and complete the gates with respect to the funding that we received.
Mr. Chairman, I have one other question on Chinese nationals that I will submit for a written answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. Senator Tillis.
Good afternoon, Secretary Mayorkas. How's your day going?
Good afternoon,
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
Thanks, Senator Welch. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Abate, I want to come to you because Tennesseans are incredibly concerned about the politicization of the FBI. And they have watched the FBI target parents, people of faith, people with conservative values. And I am often asked, what group is going to be next? And how did we get to this point? Because they have watched the FBI, under your leadership, draw their guns on a pro-life advocate. That was stunning to them. That was done in front of his wife and children. They have labeled parents interested in education as domestic terrorists. And all parents should be interested and are interested in their children's education. They watched the raid on a former president and a political opponent on his home. And these have confirmed their worst fears, that there are indeed two tiers of justice, and that there is a political cabal within the FBI that sees it that way. Because when Hillary Clinton mishandled information and she wiped her email server with a tool called BleachBit and then beat the mobile devices with a hammer and destroyed those SIM cards, you all basically said there's nothing to see here. There is nothing to question. And when President Biden mishandled classified documents, there was no raid on his home or on his offices. But you see how President Trump has been handled with this. So it looks like the old playbook of distract and deflect. And the American people have a right to be concerned about this. Now I want to talk about Senator Grassley's information from yesterday, because when the FBI produced the document that you referred to earlier relating to the Biden bribery allegations, and you gave that to House Oversight, you all redacted any reference to the fact that the foreign national who allegedly bribed Joe and Hunter Biden had those 17 audio voice recordings. So first of all, why did you redact that part of the information?
Senator, first, as I said before, your assertion, or anyone who makes the assertion that the FBI is politicized, I reject it wholeheartedly. It's wrong, and it is not true. The work we do,
Okay,
and the
Mr.
people I
Abate,
see in
then
the
let me
FBI
ask you this. You said in your response to Senator Cruz that you and the FBI do your job to the best of your ability. So why don't you tell me what your job is? Is it to defend and shield Joe Biden, or is your job to protect this country and the Constitution of the United States? Which is it?
The job of the FBI is to protect the country, keep people safe, and uphold the Constitution of our great country.
So why
Period.
are
That's
you
what we work to
using-
do every day, objectively. There are not two standards of justice. There is only one. It's applied equally to
Practically
each and every
by
person.
perception, there are two standards, very clear standards of justice in this country. We see it every single day. The American people see this every single day. They look at you and they see a politicized entity that is weaponizing an agency of the federal government against the American people.
That is
They
not the FBI that I
out.
see, Senator.
That is not the FBI. You see, there are a lot of good people that work for the FBI, but you have a political cabal there. So why did you decide to conceal the information in that revelation to the House Oversight Committee? Why did you redact all of that pertaining to the phone calls?
We have exceptional people within the in
You're
the
not
FBI,
answering the
very
question.
best.
Why did you redact that
And they
information?
work relentlessly every day to keep this
You
country
chose
safe
not
and
to
to protect
reveal
people.
that the
Period.
calls were there, and Senator Grassley found it out anyway. Is that accurate?
With regard to the
You chose to
document,
you chose to redact it, yes or no?
we often redact documents to protect
So you
sources and
chose to
methods.
redact the fact that there are 17 voice recordings, 2 of those with the now president. You chose to redact that and not to give that to House Oversight.
I have
Is
no
that
idea
accurate?
if there are voice recordings or not. What I will tell you with respect to the
You have
document,
no-
the document was redacted to protect the source, as everyone knows.
Well, then
and this is
let-
a question of life
My
and death,
time has
potentially.
expired, but I think it would be helpful if when you came before us, if you were willing to answer the questions, it would help to remove the perception that the American people have, because this is what they see. They see you do it every day, and that is politicizing the FBI and using it against the American people who don't happen to be named Biden, Clinton, or one of the elites. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Abadi, let me just...
That's just the beginning. We will continue to work on employee wellness, both physical and mental health.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Director, thank you so much for being here with us today. I do appreciate it. As you would expect, I want to talk about Memphis.
Yes.
And our concerns we have there. There are so many structural problems, and yesterday the Memphis staff met with my team. And we heard about the facility there. You and I've discussed this previously, the leaking roof. And I know you have said you're going to have a trip to Memphis in October. But I would hope, following our meeting and following the way the employees at Memphis have highlighted with you these problems, that you've got a timeline for addressing these problems, and that has not lingered. And I would be hopeful that you are not waiting on the trip to Memphis to decide to address these. And we've got the Memphis employees here with us today, and I'm pleased that they are here. So talk to me about a timeline for addressing these issues. And we also found out that the SHU, the Special Housing Unit yesterday, is basically a condemned building. So what is your timeline for addressing that? What's the plan of action that these employees can return to Memphis and say, help is on the way?
Senator, thank you, and we've talked about this in your office. I don't have the timeline in front of me, but I know we discussed it in your office, and I know they're making progress. I know, and I know the employees that are here, I'm sure they're convinced progress is not fast enough. We are constantly reprioritizing which structures need to be fixed, but I know that we have plans in place at Memphis. I assure you, we are not waiting to fix the facility structure for my visit. Those plans will continue on the cadence that they are supposed to be on, and I look forward to visiting the facility.
Could you get in writing that timeline to me so that these employees know when that help is going to be arriving, they know when to expect it, and that they know that you all are indeed going to follow through on
Yes,
this?
Senator.
Okay, and if I could get that within the week, that would be very helpful.
Senator, we'll work diligently to get that to you.
Great. Let's also talk about the drones, because I know Memphis is understaffed. You and I had discussed the drones, and you said there was one drone that had been apprehended. I think that when we talk about drugs in our facilities, and there's been conversation in the questions here today about that, this creates a problem for the staff. And if these drones are flying in at night, and we are understaffed at night, but we know they're bringing in illicit drugs. What is your plan specifically on addressing the drones?
Thank you, Senator. So we are working on, we are utilizing managed access systems which capture all cellular signals within the confines of a prison. We are utilizing micro-jamming systems to jam all cellular signals. We are deploying and looking at cellular communications as defined by a geospatial area. So that's a lot of technical language to say we're leveraging the latest technology to ensure that we can handle what you described very accurately is a very serious situation with the drones. And the technology is constantly changing, and we're just trying to stay ahead of that changing technology.
It's a hard thing to do. I also want to ask you about home confinement and those federal prisoners that were put into home confinement during the CARES Act. And of course, the COVID pandemic is over, but you decided to go ahead and leave these individuals in home confinement rather than have them returned to the facilities. These are convicted criminals. They are serving their sentence. So where did you get the authority to decide to leave them on home confinement? And why did you choose not to return these? What was your decision matrix on that?
So I used data to make that decision in collaboration with the department. So we released over 13,000 individuals under the CARES Act, with less than 0.5% of them returning to prison. And so they were successful in the community. And so we made the decision to keep what I think today's date are about 3,300 individuals in the community, hoping that they would be better served in that situation than returning to prison.
Well, I find it interesting that DOJ thought they had the authority to give you the authority to do that and to make that decision to allow them, even though the emergency has ended. It is over. And it seems that these prisoners should go back to prison to serve the balance of that sentence. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Whitehouse.
Thanks for being here, Director Peters, and thanks for the meeting.
Thank you for being here. This is really pretty remarkable testimony coming from you all, listening to what you've had to say. Basically, we've got a broken system. You don't know how to fix it. Money's not going to solve this problem, Ms. Nanda. You don't know the numbers. You don't know the law to enforce the law. So what comes across is that we've got a Homeland Security team here that doesn't believe in securing the homeland because you don't care enough to go deep enough into the issue to be able to define the problem and be able to fix it. Now, Ms. Marcos, I'm going to come to you because I've written Secretary Becerra twice about these children that they just can't find. Now, first letter, he got Acting Assistant Secretary Jeff Hill to send a non-response to my office, and then I sent another letter, and I haven't heard anything from him. I have asked that he come to the committee and talk to us about what has happened with these 85,000 children, where they are, and why efforts are not being made to find them and to be certain that they are being cared for. But there's no response to that because there again, you all believe in open borders. Your goal is not to secure the country and the border. Your goal is to just let everybody come on in and to hell with this trying to find 85,000 kids. You didn't vet the sponsors right. You did not do an FBI background check. Imagine that. You loosen what is required of people, and then you want to come here and say, we need more money so we can do our job. All right, Ms. Director Marcos, Linda Brandmiller, do you know that name? And keep your mic on.
I'm aware of that name.
You're aware of that name. And Jaylyn Sulong, you know that name?
Yes.
Okay. And you know that both of these women were whistleblowers. And both of these women were fired for being a whistleblower. Are you aware of that?
Senator,
Quickly, my time's running out. Fast, go.
I'm not aware of the specifics.
You're not aware of the specifics. Do you know who approved this retaliation against the whistleblowers? You do not know.
Senator, I cannot speak to the specifics.
You can't speak to the specifics. Okay, was the secretary notified about the urgent situation developing in the department and that these children were being released to potentially exploitative sponsors? Did anybody pay attention to that? Or did you care? Was it 9 to 5, draw a paycheck, go on? We don't care. We're not concerned about an open border. We're not concerned about protecting children. What is your job? You're the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And you're not going to follow up on where these children are and who has custody of these children? Why did you accept the responsibility to be in charge if you're not going to do your job and protect these children? You don't have an answer to that. You don't know why you accepted the responsibility.
Senator, I would be happy
This is why
to
we need the
speak about this,
secretary
but
to
you're
come.
not giving me an opportunity.
Oh, no, I gave you the, tell me, why'd you take the job?
I took the job because I'm a humanitarian. I've spent my life in
You're a
this work.
humanitarian who
We
can't
have-
find 85,000 children and don't give a ripping flip about where they are or what is going on in their precious lives. Is that what you're telling me?
That is a mischaracterization of everything that we do. I have tried to explain, but I am not given the opportunity.
Take the time, 25 seconds.
Thank
You
you,
go.
I appreciate that. When a child is released from our care, there are a number of ways that they can continue to receive services. We attempt the safety and well-being call for every child who's been released. There is no obligation for a child or a sponsor to answer the call, and there's reasons why they may not want to answer a call from the government.
Oh, for
Additionally,
heaven's sakes, they're
please,
being
may I-
paid to take these children,
They're
and
not-
there's no reason
they're
for
not-
them to
They're
answer
not
the
being
phone?
paid- They're not being paid to take these children. Sorry. May I
Yeah, they are.
finish, please?
Yeah, they are. Go
They
ahead.
also, post-release services, over 50% of our children, we are working hard to get post-release services for all children. We are over 50% right now. That is another way to have a trusted adult in these children's lives. Legal services is another way, and we are expanding. We are providing more legal services
My
than we
time
ever.
has expired, and your
Thank you.
answers are incomplete. I've got 2 more questions I will submit for the record. Mr. Morant, I have one for you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. At this point, I want to make sure that Ms. Marcos or someone else on the panel has an opportunity to answer in complete sentences questions about the 85,000 that were mentioned in the New York Times piece. Would someone like to take that on for 60 seconds?
Thank you, Senator, for the opportunity to provide full thoughts on that. There are a number of ways that we engage with children once they have been released from our care. One way is the safety and well-being call that is made 30 to 37 days after they've been released. There is no obligation for a child or sponsor to answer this call, and there are a number of reasons why they might not want to answer a call from government. We also have a number of other touch points, some of them lighter than others. We have the ORR National Call Center. That is a call center that is operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that takes calls from children, from sponsors, from anyone in the community that has a concern or a question about an unaccompanied child. So that call center is available. And then, as I mentioned, we are providing more legal and post-release services in the history of the program. We are very dedicated to continuing to expand that with the support of Congress, and we do feel that it will make a difference by making sure that every one of these children has that trusted adult outside of the sponsor-family relationship. Thank you.
Thank you. Next senator up is history in the making. Her first appearance before the Senate Judiciary Committee, succeeding Senator Dianne Feinstein. As I said at the outset, this was an issue, the fate of these children, near and dear to the heart of the late senator. And I know you come to this meeting today with the same feelings. So we welcome you, Senator Butler. Please proceed.
Thank you so much, Chair Durbin. As noted, as a senator from a border state, a former labor organizer, and a mom,